This is Viewpoint with Chris Pierce. Today's program has been underwritten by Body Auto Real Estate, providing personal and professional real estate service since 1987. For all your real estate needs, call Diane Body Auto at 402-690-4769. Linda McDermott with Fricke & Associates is an independent insurance representative helping you with personal and business insurance as well as your long-term care, life, health, and retirement needs. Come join the conversation at PoliticalInsidersReport.com, Nebraska's source for local politics. And now, here's our host, Chris Pierce.
Good morning, and welcome to Viewpoint with Chris Pierce. I'm your host, Chris Pierce, and it's great to be back with you for our second show. Our goal for Viewpoint is to bring you, our viewers, an open and frank discussion from all points of view. Now, not to run from or to avoid the tough issues facing Nebraska, Viewpoint's decided to put itself right in the middle of the TransCanada Keystone XL Pipeline debate. With all the attention this project is receiving across the country and the involvement of famous people like the Dalai Lama, Archbishop Tutu, former Vice President Al Gore, Robert Redford, Robert Kennedy Jr., and actually recently arrested during a protest in Washington, D.C., actress and activist Daryl Hannah. Now, what might get lost in all this are the citizens of Nebraska. Therefore, we decided to invite Nebraskans to come in and discuss in a calm and, we hope, productive way the costs and possible benefits of this pipeline to the people of Nebraska. Our guest today is Herring, a writer for American Thinker, and Joe's written quite extensively on the Keystone Pipeline. Jane Kleeb, founder and executive director of Bold Nebraska, and Jim Tarnick, a fourth-generation Nebraska farmer from Fullerton, Nebraska. Jim's family farm will be directly impacted by the pipeline. Today's John and Jane Doe guests are Brian Line and Katie Heel, and they'll join us a little later. Now, before we bring on our guests, let's take a look at the history of the Keystone Pipeline, first proposed by TransCanada in 2008.
On September 19, 2008, TransCanada submits an application to the U.S. State Department for a presidential permit for the Keystone XL tar sands pipeline. The State Department then begins the environmental review process. On April 16, 2010, State Department issues its draft environmental impact statement. Later that same year, the original Keystone Pipeline, which carries crude oil from Canada's tar sands region to a pipeline terminal in Cushing, Oklahoma, is completed. On July 16, the EPA finds the State Department's draft environmental impact statement to be inadequate and asks the department to provide new analysis to address a wide range of issues, including pipeline safety and greenhouse gas emissions. On July 25th, a tar sands pipeline operated by Enbridge spills around 1 million gallons of tar sand oil into the Kalamazoo River. Because tar sands oil is unlike conventional crude and more difficult to clean up, the river is still undergoing cleanup to this day. On August 31, 2011, Nebraska Governor Dave Heineman joins U.S. Senators Mike Johanns and Ben Nelson in opposing the proposed route of the pipeline through the Ogallala Aquifer, and then asks the State Department to reject the pipeline proposal. On December 13, 2011, Congress passed the Payroll Tax Cut Extension Bill. In this bill, there was an amendment forcing President Obama to make a decision within 60 days on the approval of the Keystone XL Pipeline. On January 18, 2012, the Obama administration denies the permit for the Keystone XL Pipeline. On March 22, 2012, President Obama visits Cushing, Oklahoma, and announces his support and fast-track approval for the southern segment of the pipeline, while still being committed to a rigorous review of the northern segment. On May 4th, TransCanada submits a new application to the State Department for the northern segment of its Keystone XL Pipeline that would run from the Canadian border to Steel City, Nebraska. This is commonly referred to as the Nebraska Reroute. On October 30th, the Nebraska Department of Environmental Quality publishes its draft evaluation report of TransCanada's proposed route through Nebraska. It released its final report on January 4, 2013, in which it stated it expected little to minimum environmental impact and that the Ogallala Aquifer would not be impacted as a whole. In November 2012 and again in February 2013, thousands rallied against the Keystone XL tar sands pipeline in Washington, D.C. marching around the White House and calling on President Obama to reject the pipeline as a critical piece of his commitment to tackling climate change in his second term. On January 22, 2013, Governor Heinemann approved the new Keystone XL route by sending a 2.5-page letter to President Obama and to Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, explaining that Nebraska's review of the new underground pipeline route found that it met the Nebraska state standards.
Well, okay, that brings us up to date with where we're at now with the pipeline and its current status. But I want to introduce our first guest. First, we have Joe Herring. He is a writer for the American Thinker, and he's been writing extensively on the XL Pipeline. And we have Jane Kleeb. She is the founder and executive director for Bold Nebraska. I want to welcome you both here. I appreciate you guys coming in. I know you guys kind of talk to each other a lot. Maybe not directly to each other, but
Past each other.
Past each other. But you know what? Sometimes you got to do that to get a point across. And we're so you know what? Let's start this out, Jane. And you know what? In the research that I was doing for this, we were talking earlier. There's a lot of pros. There's a lot of cons, and you kind of said there's pros. You know what? I'm going to challenge you and give me at least one pro for the pipeline. As minute as you can, give me one.
Well, there are temporary jobs
Okay.
involved in the pipeline. The estimates range from anywhere about 2,300 to 5,000, according to TransCanada's submission to the State Department. So that's a pro. Temporary jobs are jobs. They're not long-term jobs, but
Well, and I think it's only fair. No construction job is ever
Absolutely.
temporary. So,
Yep.
Because I noticed that's been an argument that I kept reading about. They're not temporary. They're only temporary. Well,
they're
any
jobs.
construction job.
Sure, they're jobs.
Okay, Joe. So there's going to be jobs, but you know what? The numbers of jobs creation has been all over the place from what I've been reading. Anywhere from over hundreds of thousands to maybe in Nebraska 600 or 700. So help me out. Give me the real deal here on how many jobs for Nebraskans.
Well, there is no easy answer to that question, which is why the estimates have been ranging all over the board. The best estimate that I could give you would be probably the one coming from the people who are doing the hiring, and that would be TransCanada. According to them, they have written contracts to hire X number of people. That amount running across the entire pipeline equals out in their estimates into several thousand jobs. Honestly, to the unemployed person, whether it's 5,000 jobs or one job, it only needs to be one for them.
So do you have any numbers as far as, because we live here in Nebraska, as about how many Nebraskans are we going to put to work? And I think another issue is, are the people that are doing the pipeline in Nebraska, are they going to be Nebraskans? I think that's been a concern.
Not always. And simply because we don't always have the expertise, we don't have that many pipeliners to be able to do this. What you find with these types of large construction projects, not just in pipelines, but in any of these major efforts, you'll see people who travel all around the country, in some cases the world, because you require very specific expertise. The ones who are in Nebraska who have that expertise, they'll certainly have employment.
All right, Jane, I know one of your issues is going to be, and it's been a consistent issue that I've heard, is there's some environmental impact. Now, from the original route, and I can remember when you started on this project, it was about the route. I know that was one of your mantras is about the route. The route's changed. Has anything else changed?
Yeah, well, a couple things. We actually do know how many Nebraskans will be employed because we have Keystone 1 as the kind of historical example that we can look to for the realities of this pipeline. So we'll know about 100 to 120 Nebraskans will actually be employed. So that's the number that we do know, black and white, hardcore figure.
So you're saying 100 and how many Nebraskans?
About 100 to 120 Nebraskans. And that's true for all of the pipeline routes because there is a strong expertise that's needed. And there's already essentially, can look at Oklahoma and Texas where kind of a southern leg is being built right now. Mm-hmm. And the majority of folks are either from Wisconsin or Minnesota.
And that one, you're talking about the one that goes from Cushing, Oklahoma down to
That's right.
Texas.
The president did essentially expedite those permits. They actually didn't need the presidential permit for that because it doesn't cross the border, but he wanted to make sure that a lot of crude that's coming from Montana and North Dakota that's essentially bottlenecked in Oklahoma was getting the extra
So let's get
market.
back to what I talked about. TransCanada said, okay, we're going to switch it with the new permit application. It was what firmly called Nebraska Reroute. So now that's not in the Sandhills.
Well, Well, I'll just stop you
Okay.
right there because
Uh-oh.
it actually still is in the sandhills.
Okay.
So if you look at the original map that TransCanada submitted to the State Department, and we have a map that we'll actually release next week that's been looked at by University of Nebraska professors. The original map of the sandhills that TransCanada submitted to the State Department actually showed the real breadth of the sandhills. The DEQ chose to use a very shrunken version of the sandhills, if you will.
Now, are we saying that the state of Nebraska is not quite giving us a full picture?
That's right, and the DEQ actually removed something on their website that actually did show the full kind of area of the sandhills.
Because I know the maps that we looked at with both the original and with the new route, Joe, showed that there's a gap. There's a large group, and then it kind of a valley of sorts. So talk about that. Did it bypass the sandhills like they promised?
Yes, it did. It did not bypass all areas that could be described as sandy, but that's not
Which was the
case.
concern, right? The concern was when you have a type of spill from tar sands and the chemicals that are mixed with tar sands, when that goes into sandy soil, which is much more permeable, that's dangerous, especially in that area of our state, of the relationship between the sandy soil and the aquifer.
Okay,
So-
go ahead, Joe.
But in the specific area that you're referring to, that has already been designated as a sensitive area. There's extra precautions that have already been scheduled to be taken into account for the construction
I'll
through
just
that
stop you
zone.
there because TransCanada already said that they're actually not abiding by those special recommendations anymore because they technically are out of the sandhills. So
There,
Well,
construction, exigencies
I
of
think
construction will
what
make that
you're talking
determination.
now, are you talking about the 57 special that the DEQ said there was 57 special requirements that TransCanada had to abide by for this sole project? Is that what you're referring to?
In part.
Okay.
But some of the rest of this, oftentimes, and one of the things you have to look at, it's not just what happens on top of the soil. It's not just the sandy area. The oil is going to go somewhere if, in fact, it did leak. Well, what's beneath that? It's not just directly a straight shot into some underground lake. Okay? It has to pass through several layers of clay, has to pass through.
you just don't understand Nebraskan topography.
I understand it quite well.
Okay, hold on. We got to take a break, and I'm gonna let you dive back into it because I know the environmental and the impact on Nebraska land is important. So we'll be right back after this message.
50 years!
The Boys and Girls Club of the Midlands
Have been helping kids like me. Like me. Like us. For just $30 a year, I can get
a healthy meal,
homework help, exercise, a safe place to stay after school every day. At one of our 8 clubs. My name is Janelle.
And I am the Boys and Girls Club.
The Boys and Girls Club. We are the Boys and Girls Club! Like us on Facebook at BGC Midlands. Cox will donate $1 to the Boys and Girls Club.
All right, so we ended our conversation where we're talking about what is a sandhill, what's not a sandhill. But Joe ended that if there is a leak, and I think we can all agree, and I think Joe, you're going to have to agree with this. Almost virtually every pipeline, there's a leak somewhere. There's never been a perfect pipeline. So let's talk about, Jane, if there is a spill, it doesn't go straight to the aquifer. There's things between that. So did they pick the best route they could have, though?
No, I mean, if the president approves this route, we've said from day one that we're opposed to the pipeline because we don't believe that America should be relying on foreign oil, in particular tar sands. It's the dirtiest form of oil. It takes 3 times the amount of carbon emissions. It takes 3 barrels of water per barrel of oil. It's just not a good form of oil that we should be relying on.
Now,
So,
wait, you just said that you've always been against the pipeline in totality.
Yep.
But if I remember Mike correctly, when this first started, you were against the route.
it's actually not true. So our yard signs have always said, and our website has always said, stop the pipeline.
Okay.
We have said that from day one. We've then said, in our state, it is the state's responsibility to choose the route, which is why we focused on the route in our state. We always focused our pressure on the president saying he should deny the presidential permit from day one. For landowner reasons, for environmental reasons, for domestic oil reasons, I'm fine with oil pipelines, traditional crude oil pipelines from Montana, North Dakota, Oklahoma, Texas.
But you're
I'm
saying
not
you're saying
okay.
this particular because it is tar sand is a much more intensive, includes a lot of chemicals in order to get the crude.
That's right.
And actually, Joe, don't they have to mix in a lot of chemicals to to thin it out to where it can flow.
Let's define what we're talking about when we say chemicals. It's not a mystery. What we're talking about are other hydrocarbons. We're talking about mixing, first, what is bitumen to begin with? It's a fancy word for what is essentially asphalt. Okay? This building, the foundation is surrounded by it. It's used as waterproofer in people's homes for decades in the sand hills. All across this state and all across the country, we sprayed millions of gallons of this stuff on dirt roads in order to keep down the dust. This is not a new material. It's an entirely natural one.
But I think you're going to have to agree, just because we've used it doesn't necessarily that we just want it out everywhere.
No, and I'm not suggesting that we do. That's why we built a pipeline, so it stays in one place. The idea, though, that we're mixing some kind of strange, compounds with it just doesn't wash.
Well, if that's true, then how come,
Jane, let me finish.
How come TransCanada won't tell even the DEQ or our firefighters what they actually are mixing? So we know that it includes benzene and lots of other chemicals.
They will do that.
You got to give them a chance to answer.
They haven't yet, they won't.
They will do that at the time that information is needed.
Too late.
Correct.
Late.
This is a proprietary item. These recipes are proprietary to the companies that transport it. Now, one thing, right? Well, your health isn't in danger, and let me explain why. First off, you're not going to be eating, drinking, or coming in contact with this stuff.
I know, because the president's going to deny the permit.
Let's hope it won't. The aquifer was never in any danger to begin with, Chris. The aquifer is not an underground lake. It is a rock formation capable of holding water in quantity. Now, everyone's eaten a salad with oil and vinegar. Where does the oil gravitate to? The edge of the bowl.
With traditional crude, that's right. With tar sands, that's incorrect.
This is no different.
Yes, it is. Just look at the Kalamazoo spill. When that spill happened, it's a tar sand spill. It was the worst tar sands spill that we've seen in the United States. 3 years later, it's still not cleaned up. It's now almost $1 billion that American taxpayers and Enbridge are paying in order to clean it up. When that oil gets at room temperature and when it separates from the chemicals like benzene, it sinks. Correct. The EPA said 60 to 70% of that oil has sunk, and they don't know how to clean it up. They don't know how to clean it up.
They know exactly how to clean it up.
Quick answer, because we've got to get going.
They know exactly how to clean it up. The way they're doing it right now, because there's quite a bit of it. And there's two other main points that you have to look at. That was Enbridge. It was through a pipeline that was constructed poorly without any of the lessons learned that TransCanada is incorporating into this new pipeline. The other thing that you have to keep in mind here is that even though there were tens of thousands of gallons dumped into what is essentially a fast-flowing river, the contamination stopped at about 40 miles, and it was ages before they discovered it was there.
Okay.
This oil sinks and stays.
It's going to have to be your last one there. But what I want to do is give you guys an opportunity, give you a minute to talk to our audience and give them your points. Jan, I'm going to let you start since we started with Joe before, so go ahead.
Sure. This has always been about our land and water, and Nebraskans who know this issue know that we should be primarily focusing on making sure that America is energy independent. This pipeline is an export pipeline. It's going to refineries owned by Saudi Arabia, and this does nothing to help the American taxpayer. And so I urge everybody to go on pipelinefighters.org, join us in sending a letter to President Obama, making sure that he denies this pipeline and moves forward on American energy.
Thank you, Jane. Appreciate it. Joe?
First off, it's not an export pipeline. 99.7% of all of the domestic oil that is produced here or imported here remains here.
I was on a congressional hearing with TransCanada.
I didn't interrupt you, Jane.
This is
what we do export are petroleum products that we already have in excess here. And even that represents only about 8%. You're not talking about gasoline and diesel here. The bulk of what is used in each barrel of oil, 55% of it, goes to consumer and industrial products. It's not made into fuel. So when you stop the pipeline, as you say, you're not just affecting gas prices. You're affecting consumer prices all up and down the chain. You're affecting the price of this. You're wearing petroleum now. It's in the dyes that made your clothing. It's in the drink holder that you're drinking. There is no substitute for it. Now, will there be in 20, 30, 40 years? Perhaps. But in the meantime, following a policy which Bold Nebraska and Sierra Club are putting out is akin to throwing people off of a cliff hoping they'll invent a way to fly on the way down.
Okay, well, we're going to have to end it there. I think there's a lot to think about, and I think one of the things that we found out is not everyone knows all the details. I thought I knew pretty much about this, and I didn't. I mean, getting ready, I had to read a lot. So, but I want to thank Jane Kleeb from the Bold Nebraska and Joe Herring from American Thinker. When we come back, Joe's going to stay with us, but we're going to bring in someone that's really affected by this and get his point of view, and that's Jim Tarnick, who is a farmer here in Nebraska. And right now, the pipeline's going to go right through his land. So we'll be right back.
My son, the Cub Scout, helped raise money to make camping safer.
My son, the Cub Scout, stood up to the school bully.
My son, the Cub Scout, volunteers at the homeless shelter.
My sons, the Boy Scouts, helped clean up after the devastating flood.
My son, the Eagle Scout, helped save a man's life.
My sons, the Eagle Scouts, are defending our nation.
My son, the Eagle Scout, became a doctor,
civil engineer,
police chief,
wonderful husband and father,
state senator,
Join Scouting2012.org.
Selling cookies is about
the big picture. You have to have a goal, a big goal.
Something you and your team
want to do in the world. We choose where the money goes. A trip, an adventure, helping people out.
Helping a lot of people out.
And about the money, we
are responsible for it.
Handling it, managing it, tracking it, doing great things with it.
This is business.
Girl business.
The biggest girl-run business
in the world.
Did you think this was just about cookies?
Welcome back, and I found out during our break we are making history right here in Viewpoint. This is the first time Jane and Joe have sat next to each other. Now, they've stood next to each other, but they're sitting and they're being civil. I want to appreciate you guys doing that.
Of course.
So joining us for this segment is a segment that we want the everyday Nebraskan to come in, and they've heard the experts. And we have with us is Katie Heil, and we have Brian Line. Both kind of heard what the arguments were, and we're really going to find out what's the everyday Nebraskan think, and what did you hear, what did you like or didn't like. We'll start with you, Katie.
What I have a really hard time listening to is when you talk about how maybe in the future, we can look at alternatives to fossil fuels, and we're really at a turning point right now. And so we're really going beyond, we're going beyond your political stance. We're going beyond that. Is that we cannot afford, this planet cannot afford to have a pipeline, especially one as toxic as this. And so there are plans that have been drafted to get us into wind energy. We're on the wind belt. There are many avenues that we can take where we don't need to rely on fossil fuels. Where by 2030, we can very realistically look into relying more on wind and weaning off of fossil fuels.
Well, I think just because wind energy is a passion of mine, I'm a big supporter of that. But you know what? We are in a great wind city, but we don't have the support from the state to do that. They don't really, like Iowa.
Transmission lines.
Yeah, they really don't incentivize to get private partnerships involved. So, well, it's a good idea, but where do we go if we get stumbling blocks? I think is part of the problem.
Well, and the technology doesn't exist presently to get you there. Right now, in order to run an economy on wind power or solar power or any of these, you have to have the ability to store that energy.
Batteries.
If you don't have that, right, you have to have, that technology doesn't exist. The best estimates are that technology is at least 10 years away from commercial application.
I think there's some, but it's probably not the best at this point.
Not anywhere close to being able to power an economy such as ours.
If you use that rationale, though, you could then say we shouldn't build pipelines because they still leak.
Agreed.
Right?
No,
but you guys say that it's the safest for the moment. 50 years ago they weren't safe. So, we have to, at some point as a country.
Hold on, guys. You guys got your opportunity.
All right, you're right.
This is about everyday Nebraskans here. Brian, we're going to turn over to you.
It strikes me that in the discussion, and I've come back to the state after being away for about 30 years in service to federal government and overseas, mostly in national and international security areas. And I understand and kind of witness firsthand the relationship of global oil, politics, national security, military affairs, and all of that. There's a profound interrelationship along with the industries that support it or are devastated by it, depending on which end of it you are. But coming back into the state, I had begun as a boy in the Sandhills in western Nebraska and was concerned. My original understanding was that the intent was to bring this pipeline directly through the pothole country, which I thought would have been excruciatingly wrong idea from the standpoint of the most obvious part of the aquifer in terms of surface water, ponds, marshes, the river sources for the Loops and the Calamus and the Niobrara and so forth. So rerouting the pipeline certainly, I've learned in the last couple of years, made absolute sense to me to get it as far away from the principal part of the aquifer as you could. Also understanding that the aquifer itself is not quite as fragile as some have presented it to be, but I thought it seemed a reasonable compromise to sort of bring it around, bring it away, and so forth.
So let me ask you, Brian, so now that it's changed, let's agree it's in less of the Sandhills than it was before.
There's no doubt about it.
So is because it's a compromise. Is that something that you find acceptable? The new proposed route, as if it's going to be built, would you rather be built where the current plan is?
I think I would rather it be built where the current plan is, but there's some rather important codicil to that, kind of an important requirement. It did also strike me as a newbie to the problem that there'd been somewhat of an egregious effort at sort of strong-arming ranchers, farmers, and landowners across the state with threats of eminent domain, seizure of property, this sort of thing. It's one thing to give up property rights for the interstate or for an electrical transmission line that benefits everyone in the state. It's another thing to be strong-armed on property that you've owned with its value, with its heritage, with its importance to you culturally.
All right. Well, Brian, let's give them an opportunity to respond. I'll start with you, Joe. You're closest to me.
Well, as you mentioned, oil is global. It's a global commodity. Okay? There is a benefit, a net benefit to the United States for having greater access to these things. It is not being a global commodity. The greater the supply, eventually the lower the price. That won't happen immediately, just as no infrastructure effort pays off immediately. And to demand it to do so and then use that as the criteria for judging it is foolish.
All right, let's give Jane an opportunity because we'll be talking to you again. So.
I mean, Canada and TransCanada in particular are in trouble because tar sands is landlocked. They need to get it to various coasts in order to get it to the global market to get a higher price. In TransCanada's application to the Canadian Energy Board, they said if this pipeline went through, gas prices would go up anywhere between 10, 15 to 20 cents in the Midwest states because you're essentially diverting oil from the Midwest regions onto the export market.
At first.
Right.
So it doesn't help us with gas prices, and it doesn't help us become energy independent. And we don't need another oil pipeline. What we need is to transition our country onto a real energy plan like the president has done, making our cars more energy fuel efficient. That is the plan we need to go on.
Okay, well, we're going to have to wrap this segment. Katie and Brian will be back, but let me just wrap it. Katie, you're saying we need to get pipeline's unacceptable, we need to be looking at alternative.
Absolutely.
Brian, you're saying you can deal with the new route, but there's some other considerations, especially with eminent domain, which we're going to get into in the second half, but that seems to be where you were at?
Yes.
Well, good. I'm glad you guys, because those are two things we really didn't talk about. I'm glad you guys brought those up. So we're going to be back in just a moment, but if you want to be a John or Jane Doe, make sure you go to our website, www.ne-viewpoint.org, and you could be sitting right here giving your opinion and challenging our experts. So we'll be right back.
The Midwest Ovarian Cancer Association mission is to support women diagnosed with ovarian cancer, to educate the public about the disease, and to support research. Currently, most women diagnosed with ovarian cancer have advanced disease and require prolonged medical treatment. Our goal at MOCA is to see fewer women diagnosed in advanced stages and to assure all women the availability of support and access to information. Please support these efforts by liking us on Facebook.
All right, welcome back. Had a great conversation so far, but I am joined by our newest guest, Jim Tarnick. He is, you own a farm in Fullerton, Nebraska?
Yes, that's correct.
Perfect. And then we still have Joe Herring. He's the author and writer at American Thinker. So this is, and I'm glad you could be here. It was a 2-hour trip. I thank you for coming in, because I think one of the things that we haven't talked about yet, because we've talked about large-scale things, but one of the things I want to make sure we talk about is how does this pipeline have the potential to affect everyday Nebraskans? And you're a great example of that So tell us a little about yourself and how the pipeline's affected, or how could it affect you?
Well, I farm in the Fullerton area, and on this proposed reroute, it'll travel through 2 farms of mine. One a they're both pivot irrigated. One is actually my home farm, and that pipeline would be somewhere within 500 feet of my farmhouse, and several wells. And
now I was reading some of the things, and I'll be honest, it was from the TransCanada website, so I want to get your interpretation, because they were saying they really made it a point that they were going to work with landowners, and they specifically talked about, you know, pivot irrigation. They specifically talked about farmer ranchers that graze, because if I'm correct, and Joe, you may know this, that there is a 50-foot wide easement, and for those that aren't, what an easement is, it allows whoever is granted that easement access to that property. A good example is in Omaha, OPPD has an easement on everyone's property in order to get to power lines or things like that, and Cox. That's what an easement. So they need a 50-foot wide easement all along the pipeline. So I'm not hearing that. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not hearing that the cooperation doesn't seem to be there, or I mean, are they cooperating with you at all, or?
Well, no. Like when the first land agent come out, he initially actually talked to my mother, who was on the farm, and thought she was the owner, and was telling her about how eminent domain worked. And when he realized that I was the owner, he also tried to tell me about eminent domain, and I should jump on, get the best price we can right away, and he didn't even have a permit or nothing, and this was the first information I was getting about it, and I just told him I want to look into this and stuff. I looked in further, and I went to some other meetings, heard some other points. They came back to me then, not so much asking about an easement for the ground, but wanting to do a soil survey. First, they offered me $600 for a soil survey. I said no. They come back a month later. Now they're offering $1,200 for a soil survey. And I still said no. Now, as we've further gone on into this, I've once been contacted by TransCanada since the governor approved this proposed route without federal permit yet, and I've had a TransCanada agent tell me that they can use eminent domain on.
So let's talk about that, because I know, Joe, in my research that, first of all, Nebraska got caught with its pants down, first of all, because before last year, Nebraska really didn't have any laws on the book about how to deal with pipeline siting.
They didn't have any laws stating what their position would be for over control and oversight.
Right. So it was kind of...
They always deferred to the federal authorities on that.
Now that's changed. So let's talk about, maybe you can help explain to our audience what exactly eminent domain and how TransCanada got that authority, because they do have the authority of eminent domain, do they not?
They are a utility, much the same as a railroad would be, or any power company. Now, eminent domain is one of those things that is brought up as a bit of a scary boogeyman, but in reality, had that land agent not brought up eminent domain when they made their first contact with you, they would have been in violation of the law. They're a utility. They have to let you know up front from the beginning that they are a utility, that they are seeking an easement, and what the circumstances and process are and may be. Nobody likes the idea of having any of their land accessed or taken. But in this case, you have to understand this is an easement. It is not a wholesale taking. They're not going to take this land and run a string of Dairy Queens on it.
Yeah,
most pipelines, you can't even tell where they're at, with the exception of some flags warning you don't dig here.
Well, it's not, but from our research, it actually isn't just the pipeline. Because, first of all, if you just did crops, you could grow crops over the pipeline, but you can't build a building.
No.
So if you had a building...
Any more so than you could with a OPPD easement.
But if a building was already there, it would be demolished and could not be replaced. Am I correct in that?
I just want to say in these sample easements they gave us, though, they gave liability, almost total liability on us, and also saying that such things as the use of heavy equipment. Run a combine over this. That if it causes any damage, that damage falls on me.
Okay. Oh, so you're saying not only do they have an easement, but then they can dictate what you can do in that 50-foot.
That's what they're trying. That's what they're trying to do is dictate these rights.
But the other restriction, though, from our research with that is, of course, you can grow crops, but things could happen to where if you had a road or if you had some sort of for cattle, for grazing cattle, if you had from one pasture line to the other, that could really wreak havoc. And from what we're hearing, and you could help interpret that, it's our way or the highway. This is going to happen.
Not necessarily.
Do you think that
most utilities don't provide any compensation whatsoever. They do move towards eminent domain at the end. TransCanada is offering dollars that, while are negotiable, those dollars are akin to purchase value for the value of the property if they were taking full ownership. They're paying this for an easement. Now, you can...
But it's an easement with conditions, from what I understand.
All easements have conditions, and you have to have these conditions because, for example, what you mentioned, heavy equipment. You can't very well blame TransCanada if a landowner is using heavy equipment and damages the pipeline. There has to be some basis in legality for understanding who becomes responsible. That doesn't mean that they are not still going to take care of the spill.
But you know what,
Jim, I'm going to let you answer that question as soon as we come back.
But you would be paid for that.
Okay, Jim, you're going to get to start because you're going to answer that question when we come back. We'll be right back.
The Midwest Ovarian Cancer Association mission is to support women diagnosed with ovarian cancer, to educate the public about the disease, and to support research. Currently, most women diagnosed with ovarian cancer have advanced disease and require prolonged medical treatment. Our goal at MOCA is to see fewer women diagnosed in advanced stages and to assure all women the availability of support and access to information. Please support these efforts by liking us on Facebook.
For 45 years, Family Housing Advisory Services has been improving quality of life by helping people achieve housing and financial stability. FAS prevents homelessness, educates homeowners, provides foreclosure prevention options, develops financially wise consumers, offers affordable mortgage lending options, eliminates housing discrimination, and reduces poverty. Programs and services include homebuyer education, tenant services, financial management, tax assistance, homeowner finance, and fair housing. For more information, call 402-934-7921.
All right, thanks for sticking with us. We ended with, we were talking about eminent domain and basically the right of an easement, but from my understanding and some of the research, yes, they get a right of an easement, but there's conditions. I think we were talking about you can't do certain things on your land now.
Well, yeah, and I was saying, I don't think it's right to push this on me and then also say that I got to follow their guidelines. If this route would go through, they're going to tear out valuable shelter belts, and I can never replant those trees that protect my cow and calf crop from winds and everything when I'm calving. I just don't feel like a private, and this is a private company, a foreign private company coming in here. Not like, we've talked about easements and that, and eminent domain being used for public use. Well, I don't see the public use when a private company's coming in, and also in that easement, they're asking for a perpetual for a pipeline they say is only going to last 50 years. Well, why do they want a perpetual lease? Now, and they don't answer any of these questions that we ask them.
Joe mentioned that TransCanada is offering compensation. Can you talk about that, or is that something you can't talk about?
I've heard some of the offers. I haven't specifically been offered anything, but you take these offers out. You take these offers out over 10 years of that money. If you could just hold that money for 10 years and use it to pay the expenses, you pay taxes on that ground. Now, when this pipeline comes through, that ground will never produce like it does again. Okay? You take that money out over 5-7 years, okay, and when that's gone, now I'm losing money on this ground, plus I have to pay the taxes on it. Now, I don't see where that is right and where it economically hurts me while TransCanada is trying to make money.
And that's a good question because, Joe, because he had mentioned, this is a foreign company. You're right, it's a utility because it's a resource. But in reality, when we talk about OPPD or NPD or MUD, those are resources that are used locally. There's no guarantee that the oil that's going from Canada through the United States down to the Gulf is even going to be in the Americas or even used for local consumption. So isn't that different than a power line who's actually going to give me electricity, or a gas line that's going to feed to my furnace? I mean, there's a bit of a difference there.
Not really, because it would be if
Now,
TransCanada...
how's it not? If
if
utility is for my benefit, but in this case, there is no guarantee that the benefit, the oil, is going to be refined and used in America.
Likewise, there is no guarantee that all of the electricity generated by OPPD is used by OPPD's customers. They sell that to other states. You don't have a guarantee.
But does
now,
OPPD
is a producer.
Does produce electricity
but they
for
are,
you.
Right, but they are a producer. There's the difference. TransCanada does not own what they do, what they're shipping. They are merely the shipper of that oil. They transport the oil from one spot to another. They don't own it. So to ask them to determine how it's used at the end would be akin to asking Werner Trucking to tell the stores they deliver things to how they have to sell them and to whom. It's not their oil.
Then why do we need this line?
But do you think that is something that's confusing the public? Because that is right. TransCanada is basically just a pipeline. That's all they do. They transport. Do you think a lot of people, a lot of landowners, or a lot of people actually think that they own the oil? They think they own everything, so TransCanada is maybe getting more blame than they should?
No. I guess I think most people think that this pipeline, like for me and my neighbors, we think it's a pipeline being forced upon us where we don't see no benefit. I mean, these tar sands oils can only be made into a grade 4 diesel that, with our past carbon emissions being passed out, we don't even use.
That's not
and it's all going to go
case.
to China.
The majority of each of those barrels goes into production of consumer products, industrial products, commercial uses that have nothing to do with
Why is it going all to
fuels.
China?
It's not going all to China.
It's in their permit application.
No, it's in their permit application to send it to the refineries who are capable of refining it. Now, much of what we refine is not ours to begin with and gets sold back out to other people. In order to say that is an export is really a bit of a misnomer. If Venezuela sends it to you to refine and then you sell it back to them as a refined product, was that really an export? No, you were just performing a service that, by the way, does provide American jobs.
Okay, so let's transition, because I want to give you guys an opportunity for a closing statement. And I think Jane went first last time, so I'm going to let you go first this time, and then we'll give Jim the final word, and then we'll bring in our John and Jane Doe. So
the one thing that I think we need to look at here is that I don't know if you have any rail lines that go across your property, but absent the pipeline, that oil's still moving. Except it's moving by the Burlington Northern Santa Fe in 110-car tankers, that each tanker is capable of holding 31,000 gallons. But rather than moving through a very highly regulated underground pipeline, these are traveling through our towns, through our cities, past our schools, over countless water crossings, above ground, in a state where in the last 3 years we have had 221 train derailments. Just in Nebraska alone, 5,000 nationwide. If you really want to look at the environmental impact, pipeline is definitely the environmentally responsible way to go, because shipping it by train hundreds of times a day, you're looking at literally one train with the potential of spilling 3 million gallons.
All right, Jim, you got the last word, my friend.
Well, a pinhole-sized leak in this pipeline would be over 100,000 barrels of oil right there. And that's until they can even find it. So I'd rather, if we can't stop the tar sands from being mined and brought over, I'd rather see it come over the top where we can at least watch it. You say a regulated pipeline. How do you regulate anything underground? You can't see it. Nobody's going to see it until it's too late. I just feel with our president, I'm a farmer. We don't even have a farm bill out there yet, anything that protects us. We're in a bad drought. I'm not even sure what our crop insurance is going to be next few years. And you're telling me our president, if he does not veto this and stop this, that he would give TransCanada almost $1 trillion bailout? I mean, for their government, when their own people don't want a pipeline going across it and taking it out. I don't feel like it's my responsibility, and I don't think we need to have those types of responsibility on us landowners. And also, you talk about trains going through the towns. What about the water supplies everywhere? It's right there.
All right, well, we're going to have to end it there. It's been a great conversation. There's a lot of things we weren't able to cover, and you just can't do it in this amount of time. But when we come back, we'll bring back Katie Heil and Brian Line, our average Nebraskan, our John and Jane Doe, and they'll be able to ask you questions again and go from there. So we'll be right back.
50 years!
The Boys and Girls Club of the Midlands
have been helping kids like me.
Like me.
Like us. For just $30 a year, I can get
a healthy meal,
homework help,
Exercise,
a safe place to stay after school, everything.
At one of our 8 clubs. My name is Janelle.
And I am the Boys and Girls Club.
The Boys and Girls Club. We are the Boys and Girls Club! Like us on Facebook at BGC Midlands. Cox will donate $1 to the Boys and Girls Club.
For 45 years, Family Housing Advisory Services has been improving quality of life by helping people achieve housing and financial stability. FAS prevents homelessness, educates homeowners, provides foreclosure prevention options, develops financially wise consumers, offers affordable mortgage lending options, eliminates housing discrimination, and reduces poverty. Programs and services include homebuyer education, tenant services, financial management, tax assistance, homeowner finance, and fair housing. For more information, call 402-934-7921.
And welcome back once again. And once again, we're joined by our John and Jane Doe, Brian Line and Katie Heil. And they've been listening to our last segment, so they're ready to go. We started with Katie last time, so we're going to give Brian the first shot this time. Brian?
Well, I would just have a couple of points, if I may. I think on the issue of eminent domain, for the most part, at least in the history of this country, as I understand it, eminent domain has always been really the realm, truly, of government. It has only in very rare cases been delegated to state or local entities for decision, in certain cases. It has been very controversial in recent years when it was given to private concerns. I think there were some examples when I was living on the East Coast of neighborhoods being essentially demolished in order to be replaced by higher-end condominiums, this sort of thing. I think that's wrong. I think it's also a challenge to sovereignty as we understand it, particularly in a legal or international legal sense. The second part of it is that any pipeline that would go through the properties of people like Jim or others that are affected by this, I would tend to agree that I don't think that a payment in perpetuity is a realistic thing to do. I'm just not sure I agree with that. But I do think that a far greater value and a proper market value extended for some length of time, short of perpetuity, and negotiated would be appropriate, because his loss of income is going to be palpable, and that is, I think, again, from a standpoint of a farmer, that's just an unacceptable thing.
Joe?
Realistically, we're unique here in that we have public utilities. That's not the case in most states. Most states, those are actually private companies, for-profit companies, yet they have the power of eminent domain. That goes back decades and decades. So what you described in New Haven, Connecticut is an abuse of eminent domain. It is not analogous to what TransCanada is proposing or to what utilities do every day all around the country. The other thing you have to keep in mind with this payment, it says on the lawyers for the landowners, Domino Law, right on their website, they kind of let the cat out of the bag about what this eminent domain argument is really about. They describe how much TransCanada is spending to lobby, how much they're spending to build it, how much they're spending to do this, that, and the other. And at the end, they say, and this is all they're going to give you, you can get more. Join our thing. It's about money.
All right, Jim, chime in there, because you're kind of shaking your head there a little bit.
Well, I said it ain't about money, and you can't tell me that this isn't an abuse of eminent domain powers. You keep saying, private utility, public utility. Let's not forget, this is a foreign company. This is not U.S. company. This is a foreign company wanting to come in
Many
here.
utilities are owned by foreign interests.
Let him finish. Go ahead.
And come in here. And like I said, our state legislature sold us out. They led this lobbying money. They were lobbying. They sold us out with this eminent domain, with the bill that they put in a year ago to let this all happen in the first place. And like I said, the price that they'll give us will not make up for what we will lose economically. I can tell you what, there are several producers that raise seed corn. Once that pipeline goes through their field now, with the heat that thing will generate, they cannot raise seed. You're taking away another source of income for them, because you cannot raise the seed corn on this field because it will not pollinate evenly, and that's, you got to have that in a seed corn field. Now you're taking away jobs from us. You're taking away profits from us.
And farmers, their job is their livelihood, is their family. Katie, go ahead.
Well, I definitely have to agree with that. I mean, you take a look at landowners, and we are in the breadbasket. A primary source of income for Nebraska is food and agriculture, and there just has been serious abuse towards landowners, towards ranchers by TransCanada. And it's just really hard to believe that a privately owned company, a privately owned pipeline, will really benefit the public in the end.
Joe?
All I can say is that you have to look at the data.
I have looked at the data, and it has been ghastly. It's really ghastly. And then when you talk about money, it does all boil down to money, and that's what's so frustrating, is having to separate money and the people who are in bed with money being equivalent to power. And I've met so many people who are lovely and are trying to just defend their land and saying, look, this won't work for us. This is not practical.
Do you imagine that anyone who had land that was crossed by a railroad, for example.
But this isn't a railroad. This is not a railroad.
It operates in no different fashion.
It is completely different from a railroad.
It's not at all.
Contaminate our
water. Well, Jim, I think...
Let's take a look at what spills and how many of them.
I certainly understand where eminent domain came into the picture, but it is not applicable in any kind of fair manner when you're talking about a toxic pipeline.
There's nothing fair about eminent domain. That is a legal remedy when
but when you compare it to a train,
the risk reward is not there for this pipeline.
Exactly.
Oh, it is definitely there.
No,
for
it is
pipeline.
not.
Well, and I think we're all gonna. I don't think we're gonna get agreement on that one. But I will have to say, Jim, there is a difference between a railroad because currently some oil is being transported from the west just on rail cars.
Virtually all of it is being transported.
From my understanding, that's the reason why they want the Keystone XL.
Which is also the reason...
Is to replace some of that. But
is to expand. There's right now in the back.
I don't want to get into that because there's even arguments that the current pipelines aren't even to capacity yet, but unfortunately we couldn't get into that. But I wanted to thank you guys. I want to thank Joe Herring. I want to thank Jim Tarnick, Katie Heil, and Brian Line. I keep forgetting names. And I also want to thank Jane Kleeb for being on the show. Again, find out more information. We'll have some websites and other things at the end of the show that you can educate yourself more about this process and to keep up with it. With that, I want to thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
This is business.
Girl business.
Girl business. Girl Scouts should totally run the world.
I think we already do.
Did you think this was just about cookies?
When we look at the subject of energy policy, it seems our country, even our state, lags behind the rest of the world. The United States energy policy has placed our state in a precarious position. Now, the world needs oil, and right now our friends to the north have that precious resource. Oil-producing companies want pipelines to transport their product because it's less expensive, and it increases their bottom line. Now, that's not a bad thing, but we must weigh the risks that we have to endure for the benefits they'll receive. Now, what does this mean for the Keystone XL Pipeline? We build it. In a March 1st memorandum, State Department officials concluded that the pipeline would have no significant negative impact on the environment. Some may agree and some may disagree, but we should all face the fact that this pipeline will most likely be built and its route will run right through our state. Now, I applaud Governor Heineman and the unicameral for calling a special session last year to ensure that Nebraska, not a foreign company, made the decision as to where in our state this pipeline would go. In fact, that this pipeline will create jobs that currently don't exist, and jobs that are desperately needed. Therefore, I call upon TransCanada, Governor Heineman, and the Nebraska unicameral, as well as labor leaders, to focus on ensuring that these jobs go to Nebraskans. Like many of you, I do have concerns about the potential negative impact that these tar sands pipeline brings. I share the concerns that Nebraska landowner Jim Tarnick brought to our discussion. How do we know when a leak develops if the pipeline's buried? We do need to focus, the makeup of the pipeline itself. In addition, real scrutiny is necessary regarding the reliability of the much talked about detection and shutoff systems that are vital for the safety of this pipeline project. This simply cannot be a build it and forget it project. Finally, if we really care about our environment, if we're really ready to recognize that U.S. energy policy is flawed, and if we're serious about putting Nebraskans to work with good paying jobs, there is a solution. And that solution not one politician, environmental group, landowner, or even labor group should be against. The state of Nebraska must change its policy toward wind energy production. You know, Nebraska has the 4th largest wind energy resource in the country. It has the potential to create tens of thousands of jobs right here in Nebraska. Landowners across this country support wind energy projects because of the income they receive for the use of their land for turbines. Turbines that have zero negative impact on the environment. Turbines that produce energy. Now, Governor Heineman and the unicameral must provide incentives that will attract wind energy development to Nebraska. Capturing wind energy doesn't put our sandhills at risk and poses no threat of contamination to the Ogallala Aquifer. As recently as last October, the Lincoln Journal-Star reported that even Governor Heineman believes that wind energy production is important to Nebraska. With this in mind, now is the time for all parties to step up and demand wind energy for Nebraska. It's time for Nebraska to focus on its own natural resources instead of being used and abused by the world's oil producers to make a buck. If not, then we must resign ourselves to more oil pipeline battles and more pipelines crisscrossing our beautiful state. Nebraska, that threatens our many valuable natural resources and the livelihood of fellow Nebraskans. I want to thank you guys for joining us today and a great discussion about something that's really important in Nebraska. I want to thank our guests, Joe Herring of the American Thinker, Jane Kleeb of Bold Nebraska, and Nebraska landowner Jim Tarnick. I also want to thank our John and Jane Does, Katie Heil and Brian Line for their input, making sure it's not just the experts giving you the final word. Join us again next week when we're going to be talking about voting rights. You know, the Supreme Court just heard a case about whether or not voting rights should be kept. So let's take a look at that and the many bills, including voter ID, that's happening right here in our state. So until then, thanks for joining Viewpoint, and we'll see you next time.